Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Nolan Pillay, and I'm your host for the show Inspirational Journeys Through Life. And today it's our pleasure and honor to welcome Kevin Palmieri to our show, which is Inspirational Journeys Through Life with Straight Talk with Nolan. Kevin is the CFO, founder, and co-host of Next Level University, a global top 100 self-improvement podcast with more than 1,000 episodes. This is admirable, folks, and 600,000 plus listeners in over 125 countries. I love it already. Some people find rock bottom. He found out that rock bottom had a basement. How profound is that? Now, in his mid-20s, he had it all. He had a beautiful girlfriend, high-paying job, a sports car, dream body. I think he still has a dream body. He's looking good, which is great, but still ended up sitting on the edge of a bed debating suicide. Now, suicide is not something that's very easy to talk about or even mention as well. Myself personally have been a suicide survivor, so I know exactly what Kevin actually went through, maybe not in detail of the pain he went through, but we might just get into that a little later. Now, after his rock bottom moment, he went all in on a holistic self-improvement journey. He was determined to overcome his anxiety, depression, and to finally live the life he always dreamed of. Now, years later, he now hosts a podcast that impacts hundreds of thousands of people in countries all over the world. So, Kevin, once again, welcome to our show. I'm most certainly looking forward to learning more from you as well. So, would you mind just sharing for about 2 minutes with our audience a bit more about you? Because you sound so interesting, such an interesting journey to date.
Well, thank you. Number one, thank you for the kind words. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I appreciate it very much. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I am just a person who grew up, and I wish I had more self-improvement in my life. I was raised by my mom and my grandmother. I didn't know my dad. I didn't meet my dad until I was 27. And at the end of the day, Nolan, my goal is to be the person that I needed, not only at my lowest point, but to be the person that I would resonate with, to be the person that I might be able to look up to when I was younger and say, you know what, I want to learn from that person because I resonate. They're relatable. I can understand where they're coming from, and it makes sense to me. That's really my ultimate goal.
Wow. I like that, right, Kevin? Because you said something very important right there. Like, going back to your younger self and actually having that conversation, it's like shadow work, right? And I'm sure you picked this up when you did your self-improvement tools and techniques as well. And not many of our listeners do know that they can actually go back in time and have this conversation with themselves. And we're not saying turn back the clock or anything. You can picture your younger self, and whatever your younger self had gone through at that point, it's okay for you to tell your younger self, they had no control over the situations, or they couldn't do anything about it. Because that's when we start that cleansing or that healing process that we get to become better people as well, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of us, we're so focused, and again, it's not a bad thing, but we're so on the present as well as the future, when we have to understand that the reason our present is the way it is because of our past.
Yeah.
For most of us, we're living from a place of the past in our present, and we're hoping it's going to change in the future. But the only real way to change your future is to change your present by at least visiting and redesigning your past, or building a new relationship with your past. That's why awareness is it's a key, and it's such a powerful thing, because when you have it, everything starts to make a little bit more sense.
Absolutely. Conscious awareness. Because that can take us so much more into the future of our lives as well, and help us to overcome any situation that we may encounter as well. So, Kevin, you speak a lot about consistency as well. So why do you think consistency is really important?
It's interesting. I didn't always understand the importance of consistency until it crossed the threshold where I realized we would never be where we are today if it wasn't for consistency. This is always my analogy, Nolan. I don't know about you, but right now I can't do the splits. If I tried to do the splits, something bad would happen and I would definitely injure myself. But if I had a conversation with you and I said, hey, Nolan, let's have a commitment with one another. By this time next year, you and I are going to be able to do the splits. So 365 days from today, we're going to do it. We're going to take a picture and we're going to say, look at what we've accomplished. Yeah. the odds of me being able to do the splits in a year from today go down drastically with if I do less consistency. So if you think of it this way, if I do 365 days where I practice the splits, the odds of me being able to do it are pretty high. If I only do it 4 times a week, the odds go way down. If I only do it 2 times a week, the odds go way down. If I only do it 1 time a week, I'm only practicing 52 times. 52 versus 365, right? So if you do it every day, you're going to get 7 times the results if you just did it once a week. And I try to connect that to anything. If you're not consistent in your relationship, the odds of your relationships succeeding are low. If you're not consistent in your health journey, the odds of you succeeding there are very, very low. If you're not consistent with your money, we have to understand that the things that we do most often are the things that create the results in our lives. And this is something I hear very often is, I'm not consistent. That's not true. You are consistent. It's just not necessarily in the ways that you want to be yet. So stopping at the drive-through for a coffee in the morning is you being consistent, right? If you're every morning you stop and you get a breakfast sandwich and coffee, that is consistency. It just might not be directed in the direction that you want it to be. So you really can't succeed long-term without consistency. It's not possible to reverse engineer an outcome unless you're going to be consistent on it every day.
Indeed. And I like that you said that it applies to anything in life, not just only doing the splits kind of thing. And that goes towards your goals or whatever you are working towards as well. You can't really just do it once in a while and expect things to just happen like that. You must be consistent with. Totally agree. And it's so important. So to the listeners out there, that's such a valid point. Whatever you are chasing after, whatever you're going towards, make sure that you are consistent. Try and make it into a habit, a daily habit towards that goal, and watch. Once you achieve it, then you just move on to the next one as well. You just don't stop there. And most definitely consistency is something that's really important. You know, another thing I picked up as well is I did pick up that you've been through some struggles. We've all been through struggles as well. Life is never a straight line, right? If it was, there's no opportunity for growth. It has to be up and down all the time. So with these struggles that you've been through, how did you succeed, and how can others succeed by going through struggles? What are some of the things you do?
It's an interesting thing that oftentimes the darkest experiences we have allow us to create the lights that we use later on. So, and again, I hadn't always thought this way, but for me, I try to take out, okay, what's the positive I can take from this negative situation? Now, when we were talking about rock bottom, having a basement, and me sitting on the edge of a bed debating suicide, it's very hard to take something positive from that. I've taken purpose from that, which is great. And I understand that I'm very lucky and privileged to have that opportunity. But if you're out there, I think the way to look at it is, okay, number one, where are my problems today compared to where they were 5 years ago? I think we forget that as we grow and as we evolve as human beings, our problems also become higher quality.
Yeah.
And yeah, you might have a bad day today, but is your bad day as bad as it was a couple of years ago? That's an important perspective, and that's an important place to look. But I think to the original question, Nolan, you have to understand that there are lessons in the losses. Every time you make a mistake, every time you have a failure, every time you have some sort of pain, there is a lesson buried in there. And it's up to you to sit with it and say, okay, what can I learn from this? I mean, yeah, I know I had a really tough breakup and that sucked. The natural tendency is I'm going to blame my partner. My partner was terrible. It's never my fault. It's never been my fault. But what if we sat with that for a little bit longer? What would we come to? Well, maybe I was insecure. Maybe I was too controlling. Maybe I didn't believe in my partner's goals or dreams enough. That makes sense why that didn't work out. So yeah, I think you really have to sit with the discomfort of the quote unquote failure, and you have to explore. You have to sift through the rubble to figure out, okay, what are the positive things that I can take from this to hopefully allow me to avoid this exact thing happening in the future?
Wow. So you've been through the journey where you ask yourself these deep questions. For example, with the suicide, I'm sure you went back and you asked yourself, why was I trying to do that? What was I trying to do, right?
Yeah. And that's so what happened for me, I found quote unquote success in my mid-20s. I was financially free. I had everything you could ever want. The body of my dreams, the girlfriend, the car, all that stuff. But my girlfriend ended up leaving me. because I was very, very scarce. I was very insecure, and she wanted to go chase her dreams, and I told her not to. So she ended up leaving me and chasing her dreams, and that's exactly what she should have done. But after that happened, I was so hurt and I was so heartbroken. I convinced myself that if I made way more money, I would have way more fulfillment and I wouldn't have any pain. I wouldn't feel bad about myself. So that next year, I ended up getting a promotion at my job. I worked in an industry called weatherization. And all that means is we would go into buildings and we would make them more energy efficient. So I worked in a lot of schools. I worked in fire stations, police stations. We worked in state-owned buildings. The upside of that is you make anywhere from $60 to $120 an hour, depending on where you're working. The downside of that is we worked in other states all the time. So I would work all along the East Coast of the United States. So if you fast forward to the end of that year, I had been on the road for 10 months out of the 12 months. Every single week, I was living in hotels and working in different states. Now, for me, Nolan, I loved it because I was making good money. Yeah. So we got to the end of that year. I opened my final pay stub. I made $100,000 at 26, no college degree. Awesome. But after 5 minutes, you really start to sit with it and you say, okay, I don't feel any different. I mean, yeah, my bank account has more money in it and I can afford things, but I'm still insecure. I still don't have any confidence. I'm still super scarce. I'm still not proud of who I am. Like, what's going on here? In that moment, I realized that for most of my life, I had lived unconsciously. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious. So I started a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast. I fell in love with podcasting as I fell out of love with my job, but I still had to go to work because I had to pay the bills. And it just kept getting worse and worse for me, where I knew I should be podcasting. I knew I wanted to be podcasting. I knew this job, the way it was not good for my mental health. It was not good for my physical health, but I didn't know how to get out. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And I felt more stuck and more trapped. And eventually I was sitting on the edge of a hotel bed and my alarm clock went off that morning. I sat up, I slid to the edge of the bed. I'm lacing up my work boots. And it was like there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time, and every single one was on a different station. And if you're listening, you might have experienced this in some way, shape, or form. But one of these stations is saying, Kev, you're stuck here forever. You're never going to find a job where you make this kind of money again. You're stuck. If you do work up the courage to leave, what will your friends think? They all look up to you because you make so much money. What will your family think? They really look up to you because you make so much money. And if you do leave, do you really think you're going to go be a successful podcaster? Is that really how this is all going to work out for you? And that's when I had that thought of, well, if I was just to take my life, I would take my problems with me. And that's something I reflect on so often, because I realize one of the reasons, and mental health is a very challenging thing, but one of the reasons is I did not have belief in a brighter future. I was convinced that where I was in that moment was where I was going to be forever. And that's one of the things I reflect on often. Even in the season of life that I am now, it might seem like we are either doing really well in business or we're not doing as well as we have in the past. But for me, I have to understand with perspective and context that it doesn't mean I'm here where I am forever, right? Things are going to change. As long as I keep changing what I can focus on and control, things around me will change as well. So it's something I reflect on very often. And I think it's very important to reflect on stuff like that because there's a lot of lessons there.
Yeah. And it's if you take the lesson from it as well, right? Because in anything that goes wrong in our lives, there has to be some lesson that God or the universe is trying for us to find out. And we need to find it out on our own. Nobody's going to come and say, but Kev, you're doing this wrong or you're doing that wrong. You got to figure this out on your own, because when you start figuring it out on your own, that's what allows you to have a lot of personal growth as well.
Yes,
so,
yes.
And it goes back to self-love as well, right? Because how are we to love another person if we can't really love ourselves and take care of ourselves first? So everything must start from within, becoming this best version of ourselves, becoming the best ever out there. And then we can move on from there. So very profound advice there as well. Especially with suicide and depression, it's something in 2022, there's so many cases of suicide that's going out there. And a lot of people don't know how to handle it. People are scared to reach out and ask for advice from people like you and I, Kevin, that have been through situations like this. They feel that if they're asking for help, then people will look down at them. But to the audience that are listening today, nobody's gonna look down at you. Like we said, life is not perfect. We are here to work together. This is what the human race is all about. It's about helping each other, nothing else. So thank you for that amazing share. Really powerful, especially when one is vulnerable and willing to share as well. Not many people want to do that as well. So thank you to our listeners. We're talking today to Kevin Palmieri, and such an inspirational topic or discussion that we're having. At the stage, we're going to be back in a few seconds, so hang on to your seats as we come back in a few seconds. This is Nolan Pillay from Inspirational Journeys Through Life with Straight Talk with Nolan.
Crossing the United States to his native South Africa, Nolan continues to push barriers and inspire people to inspire themselves. And you could be next. Join Nolan's 7-day online groundbreaking program called Obstacles Make Me Stronger, aimed at teaching you how to overcome any obstacles you may face. Break barriers, be innovative, and take control of your life. For more information, check out Obstacles Make Me Stronger, now on Udemy.
Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Inspirational Journeys Through Life with Straight Talk with Nolan, and we're honored to have our guest, Kevin Palmieri, in our studio today as well. So such an interesting topic about suicide and obstacles or struggles that we all face in life as well. So, Kevin, I must ask you this, right? What is something that you wish you knew earlier in life?
My mind goes a couple places when I hear that. Number one, I always assumed that, and we talked about this a little bit before the break, but I always assumed that I was the way I was and there was nothing I could do to change that. I remember somebody recommending a book for me. They recommended Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I said, I don't understand. Why should I read that? I don't understand. What is that going to teach me that's going to change my life? I had a very, very fixed mindset. I assumed that I am not smart and I cannot be smart. Therefore, I cannot be successful. And that's the way I thought until I was in my mid-20s, genuinely. So the first thing I wish I knew earlier was humans are very malleable. You're like clay. You can be shaped in different ways and you can learn new things. I think that's part number one. The second thing would be the more aware you are of yourself, the more power you have to change yourself. That would be the second thing. The reason we named the podcast Hyperconscious in the beginning is it's acutely aware. It's conscious of why you're having your thought, why you're feeling your ego pop up, why are you triggered. It's understanding yourself at the deepest level, because when you understand yourself, again, everything starts to make a little bit more sense. And with that, you have a little bit more control. So I would say those are probably the top two things, Nolan.
Wow. So knowing yourself is such an important thing, right? Because if you know and understand yourself, then you kind of open the door to know how you're going to approach other people and how you're going to speak to other people as well. And it comes down to that respect, that key value as well. So I like that, knowing yourself. And, back to what we said, know yourself, love yourself first before you can even impart that love or onto someone else. So such an important thing as well. So you've been very vulnerable, I must be honest, and I'm grateful for that as well. Why do you think this is important? Why do you think being vulnerable is really important to listeners or to anyone out there?
So two things I would say. Number one, the quality of your relationships is dependent on the level of vulnerability in them. And this is all I mean by that. Vulnerability is truth. So if Nolan and I are talking behind the scenes and I'm not vulnerable, I'm not living in the truth. So Nolan doesn't actually really know me. He knows the version of me that's protecting myself. He doesn't know the real me. Vulnerability is so important because it allows you to live in real life. It allows you to live in your truth. So this is a good story. My business partner and I were away a couple of weeks ago. We were giving a speech to a school district. And we were watching this movie together that we both really, really liked when we were in high school. And it's kind of it's a rated R, kind of raunchy movie. And I could tell that we were both a little bit uncomfortable. So we watched like 45 minutes of it. We went to bed. We had a long day. We were getting ready to finish it the next night. And before we started it, I said, "Hey, Alan, can I talk to you for a second?" And he said, "Yeah, man, what's up?" And I said, "I don't think I can finish this movie. I feel dirty. I don't want to watch this. Like, this is not who I want to be anymore. I don't want to watch this movie." And he said, "Dude, I'm so happy you said that. I feel the exact same way."
Wow.
Because we were both vulnerable, we changed our behavior and said, "Look, we're not going to watch this. Let's watch something else. This isn't making us feel very good." That vulnerability allowed us to live in the truth. Now we know each other at a deeper level, and our relationship is stronger because of it. Vulnerability is you living in the truth. And if you're not living in the truth, it's very hard for you to change the things around you. If you want your relationships to improve and you want to highlight the relationships in your life that should be in your life, vulnerability is one of the best ways to do that for sure.
Wow. And that goes, I mean, just being authentic, being real. And in that way, you once you're true to yourself, like you said, others will see that as well. They'll resonate with it. And, part of the stories that we speak on the show is all about being authentic and being real, because there's a lot of people out there that can resonate with real stories and real live stories as well, like your story and my story and everyone else's as well. So it's quite important to be able to share that as well and wanting to share it as well. A lot of people don't understand that the moment you start becoming vulnerable and getting it off your chest in a way, you as a person start to feel better overall.
Yeah.
And, like you said, you don't feel like this guilt that you're doing something wrong, right? Because now you're being yourself, you're being true to yourself.
Yeah. It's brave. Being vulnerable requires bravery. And there's a lot of people that think if I'm vulnerable, I'm weak. But the reason you're not being vulnerable is because it's hard. Yeah. And if it's hard, it requires courage. And the things that require courage are admirable. It's admirable to be vulnerable. I mean, people latch onto that. And this is the other thing too. And I appreciate the compliment where you said I'm being very vulnerable. I understand that a lot of people out there have probably had similar experiences to me. And if I don't talk about it, they're going to leave this episode thinking maybe that they're alone. But if I talk about something that has happened to me and somebody else has had a similar experience, they might leave this episode and say, wow, I'm not alone. Or Kevin got through it, I can get through it, or whatever their story is, whatever their feelings are. But you can't do that unless you're authentic, to your point, Nolan, and vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. There's a lot of people that can resonate with it. And that's the idea, is to get people to realize that they may see Kevin or myself, like, we're doing really well in our business, etc. But it just didn't happen overnight like that. We've been through our struggles. We've been through our obstacles, etc. And I can honestly say to all the listeners out there as well, the only time that you can actually learn and grow in life is by being in uncomfortable situations. Because think about it for a second. If you are just comfortable and you're in this comfort cage all the time, you're not opening yourself up to grow and learn more as well. You're just too content with yourself. And a lot of that comes from where we've come back. I come from a background in South Africa where we come from a conditioned background. Conditioned to the point, Kevin, where people actually said to me that, Nolan, you are useless. You'll never be anything. And at that point, I took it personally. But as I learned and I worked on myself, I realized, okay, whatever that person said doesn't really matter now, because that's not who I am. Mm-hmm. So, to the listeners, it's such an important point as well, just to grow through uncomfortable situations. And you're not in an uncomfortable situation for no reason at all. There's a reason for everything. There's a famous saying that says something, it goes like this, that, oh man, I just lost those words now. It'll come back. But it's a famous one I always remembered. But it's all about growing through uncomfort. It's around that area as well. So, Kevin, you've been through a lot, right? You must have been through a few fears as well. What was the biggest fear of all?
Oh man, it's something I still struggle with it. The number one, the fear of failure. I didn't necessarily believe I would succeed at this. I didn't have the ultimate belief that we're going to be successful and we're going to get a bunch of listeners and we're going to make money. That was never a belief I had. My biggest fear to this day is, number one, failure. Number two, not being good enough. Number three, being left behind. Those are probably still my top three. One of my biggest ones, Nolan, is speaking on stage. I mean, yeah, I'm a speaker, but I'm still terrified to do it. It's still uncomfortable for me to do it. When we gave that speech a couple of weeks ago, there was there was 3 groups of 350 kids. And it was like, okay, this is a lot of people. Like there could be a lot that goes wrong here. So even to your point, it's one of those weird things where you have to understand that no matter what, eventually you're going to have to face some discomfort. You can either face the discomfort along the way, or you can end up somewhere in 30 years where you're not comfortable. It's that weird thing. No matter what, you're going to get some sort of resistance, and you're going to have to face your fear and discomfort, but at least choose the ones that you're facing. I don't want you to end up 15 years from today not enjoying your life because you played the comfortable route forever, right? If you play the comfortable route, you're not necessarily going to end up where you want. You're going to end up where you do. And there's a big difference between ending up where you want and ending up where you end up.
Yeah, true. And you know what, speaking, I think all speakers, right? We go through the same thing. We will, and you can confirm if this is correct. You would have had that fear thought when you just got onto stage, but how quickly did that dissolve and go away?
Yeah, very quickly.
It does, right? So
yeah,
I think it's part of our life, and it dissolved quickly for you is because you've learned how to be consciously aware of where you are and how to handle the situation as well.
Yeah.
Some people will go on stage, and if they don't know how to handle it, they'll just freeze and stay stuck there as well.
Yeah.
Wow. So you know what? While you were speaking about the fear, the thought came back to me, and it's like life is not happening to us, but for us. How profound is that as well? And we got to see it in that light as well. So Kevin, I like the second fear you mentioned. So one was the stage. What are some of the tips or techniques that you're using to alleviate that fear? Do you prep in advance to going and speaking?
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, we have to understand that the prep work is what we're doing on the day-to-day. So I always think of it this way. You should really try, and again, it's easier said than done, but you should really try to figure out, okay, what's my level 10 fear? And how do I do like a bunch of level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5? How do I face these micro fears before I ever get to the macro fear? So for me, we spoke on stage, but at that point, I had already done 1,150 podcast episodes. I've been on 400 other shows. I've given probably, I don't know, 100 speeches at this point, not all on stage, but virtual summits. So it's almost like you're going to revert to your training when you get nervous. And that's why you said some people freeze. That's their training. Their training is to freeze. Where if you have enough reps in the arena, your training that you revert to is probably going to be pretty good. So I know it's kind of a cop-out answer, but it's try to make sure that you're not giving yourself opportunities that you're not ready for yet. I want them to be outside of your comfort zone, and I want them to be scary, but I don't want them to be a level 10 fear, because it's almost like if you go to the gym and you've never been to the gym and then you do a 7-hour workout, it's not going to end well, and you're not going to want to go back. That's the other interesting thing. So I would say make sure that your life experience is lined up with the experience you're about to take.
Wow. So do you believe that we create our own fears, right?
To a degree. I think for a lot of us, our fears are created when we're children, and then we just tie in that. So it's like, I'm afraid of blank. I believe at my identity level, I'm afraid of blank. Then the next opportunity you get to face that fear, you say no, which deepens the fear. It deepens the fear. It deepens the fear. So it's almost like, I think for a lot of us, our fear it becomes a box that's checked when we're young, but we are like checking it and checking it and checking it. And if you just envision the pencil, a line and another line and another line and another line, eventually that check mark gets so dark that it's very hard to reverse. So I think that we're voting for our fears more often than we're not voting for our fears or voting against them. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's true. And, you know, to the audience out there as well, one of the ways I look at fears, and you as well, right? Fear is something that we just creating in our minds that may never, ever happen.
Yeah.
But we create this fear due to the conditioning that we actually grew up with. So when you start working on that fear, then you become like this kind of risk taker in a way, but the calculated risk taker, because you know that you're doing this with the outcome that you perceive will be for you as well.
Yeah.
Kevin, thank you so much for being on our show today. It's such an honor to have you once again. So two things. Any last tips for the audience out there? And also, please share your contact details. How can the audience get in touch with you? I will definitely put your contact details in the description as well. But yeah, tips for our audience, I think is most important. People welcome that.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I always try to say this if I get the opportunity, because I think it's very impactful. The imagination that we have when we're children is huge, right? We believe anything is possible, and we believe we're going to be astronauts and the president, firefighters, police officers, actresses, actors, comedians, whatever it is. And as we get older, we start to lose parts of our imaginations. I always say this: your reality is going to become the parts of your imagination that you hold on to and you pour into the longest. I am very grateful for where we are today, but being a professional podcaster and being my own boss and being able to do what we're doing, that is the part of my imagination that I held on to and I poured into every single day. Now, there are other things that I've let go of because I didn't want them, but you have to make sure that your imagination is empowering. A lot of us are imagining we're going to be broke in 5 years and we're going to be stuck and we're going to be in bad relationships. Odds are, if that's what your imagination is seeing, it's very possible. But if your imagination can see something brighter, then you can get there as well. So that's the last piece of parting wisdom I would give. And I always suggest people listen to the podcast. If you're interested in what we talked about today, we do 7 episodes a week on this. Next Level University, all the major podcast platforms, as well as YouTube. And if you ever have any questions, comments, concerns, you need somebody to chat with, you can just shoot me a DM. My handle on Instagram is @NeverQuitKid.
Never Quit Kid.
Never Quit Kid. That's me, Nolan.
I love it. Never quit kid. Yeah, exactly. That's what life is about. Never give up.
Yep.
Never give up, because we got to learn all the time. And the more we fail, the more we're going to learn as well. And one must not be afraid of failure. I think that's key as well. So Kevin, thanks once again. Really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy. You got so many things going on as well, but thank you for making the time. To all our listeners out there, thank you for listening to our podcast today with Kevin Palmieri. I'm sure you're going to love this episode, not just like it. So it will be on YouTube, it will be on Anchor FM, etc. So on YouTube, if you have any comments for Kevin, please put in your comments there as well. And there's a subscribe button. Subscribe to it so that you can have access to all of this podcast as soon as it's released as well. So thank you once again for listening to us. This is your host, Nolan Pillay, from Inspirational Journeys Through Life with Straight Talk with Nolan. Kevin, thank you once again, and wishing you an awesome, awesome day. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend.